Welcome to the Remarkable Retail Podcast, Episode 7, Digitally Enabled. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Steve Dennis.
In this episode, we're talking about essential number 1, digitally enabled. And to help Steve and I explore this essential part of the framework, we have assembled a fantastic panel of leading-edge thought leaders from around the world on this episode. Lockie Andrews from New York, Carl Boutet from Montreal, and Oliver Banks from London. Welcome, everyone.
Hey, thank you so much for having us on.
Yeah, it's great. It's great to have you guys. When Michael and I were brainstorming folks to have on this episode, the three of you very quickly came to mind, both given your global perspectives, but also perhaps the particular lens you bring to this topic.
All right. Well, listen, action-packed, lots of stuff to get through. I can't wait to hear and listen to our session today. So why don't we jump right in? Why don't we start with each of you telling us a little bit about yourself, your background, and what your perspectives are in a couple of minutes. Lockie, why don't we start with you?
Great. Thank you again for having me. I am Lockie Andrews. I'm the Chief Information Officer and Chief Digital Officer of UNTUCKit. I'm also the CEO of Catalyst Consulting, a digital transformation boutique consultant agency. And I advise large corporates, Lane Bryant was a client, digitally native brands, Anita Bing is a client, on transformation and digital best practices. And I've spent half my career as an operator, as the Chief Operating Officer of Tadashi, VP of Biz Dev and Growth at a company called BabyStyle.com and .com 1.0. So half my career in digital transformation as a marketing specialist, as well as a technology enthusiast, as well as implementer, combining both strategy and execution.
Oliver, tell us about yourself.
Sure. So I'm Oliver Banks. I'm based just outside of London in England. And I am a retail transformation specialist. I help retailers to understand their transformation goals and actually end up delivering them, because we all know it's very easy to talk about all these things, but actually making them happen is so much harder. I run a podcast myself, the Retail Transformation Show, and a live virtual event called Retail Transformation Live. So that's kind of my bag. My background was originally in Tesco, a large supermarket here in the UK and across the world as well, actually. And prior to that, I used to be in engineering. So I come at it from quite a systematic and logical perspective, but throwing in a few extra ideas in there as well.
Oh, fantastic. Well, welcome. All right. So back to Canada, La Belle Province. Carl, tell us about yourself.
So you had to have me on with these two brilliant people and even with a British accent on top of it. I mean, how do I even come across as credible after that? But my name's Carl Boutet, based in Montreal. I wear several hats, including managing director for our provincial innovation and e-commerce center, and do a lot of work with McGill University, where I advise and teach, and do a bunch of consulting and advisory work around all things retail strategy and the intersection of technology, design, and data.
Thank you, Carl. I wish it's great to hear your voice. I wish we could be seeing each of you in person, but this is absolutely the next best thing. Steve, this is the first episode of the podcast where we're now transitioning to talk about the framework and understanding the 8-part framework that we've discussed with the help of guests and other folks in the first 6 episodes. So why don't you take us through a little bit about your thinking around this digitally enabled, the first of your 8 essentials of the Remarkable Retail?
At the heart of this essential are a few observations, I guess, for lack of a better term. The first is that digital influence, which I'll explain a little bit more in a second, has been profound and growing. And we've observed this, I think, for at least a decade. I'm sure we'll get into the acceleration of all of this in the COVID times, but just this idea that consumers are relying on digital channels or digital media to inform their shopping journeys in some way, shape, or form. That can be as easy as or as simple as going to a website to check out retailers' hours or find the location, but it also can be much more embedded in the ultimate transaction when we talk about things like buy online, pick up in store, and so forth. The second piece I get into a little bit is how shopping has become untethered. In other words, if you go back 15 or 20 years ago, for the most part, we were going to physical stores to engage in the retail equation. And now, largely by virtue of smart devices, we're no longer tied as consumers to particular places because we can be shopping on our smart devices. And also within the realm of a physical store, a lot of the sales associates are really untethered from traditional point of sale. And now we're getting into the whole world of virtual appointments and so forth. The other thing I talk about is, and try to be careful in pointing this out in the chapter in the book, is that this isn't necessarily about being digital first. I think certainly as more and more transactions and engagements are starting in a digital channel, that's important to be mindful of. But we also need to not lose sight of the role of human beings and analog experiences in the whole customer journey. And then the last part, which I really tease out later, and I'm sure we'll get to at some point, is what I'm starting to refer to as the hybridization of retail, which is that these channels are blurring and that digital can show up in all sorts of ways throughout the whole customer journey.
Carl, Steve gets a nickel every time someone says bifurcation, because he basically invented that. You really were the one who talked about the great acceleration, I think, first. And I hope you get a nickel for that every time someone talks about the great acceleration. Tell us a little bit about how you came to that conclusion so early on in the beginning of the COVID era, and how you think it impacts digitally enabled shopping experience for good or ill.
Yeah, I'm looking actually for a dime every time. Great acceleration. I mean, that's a Canadian dime, so that's probably worth a little more than a nickel.
7 cents.
Yeah. So we'll figure it out. So it sort of came upon me, and I believe I actually used it publicly the first time, Steve, when we did your book launch in the spring. Remember, we had, I think Scott was on, and he was talking about acceleration, and I just kind of put it back into context of, we look back at some of these major transitions or economic devastations, unfortunately, which were the Great Depression and then the Great Recession. And the word acceleration, I mean, Scott brought it up in that conversation, but I've been hearing it more and more. And I put it in that context saying, could this be, will we look back on this, obviously very difficult time in history, but at least maybe take out some of the positive, which would be how we accelerated a lot of the initiatives. So the idea of why the word acceleration, and even with or without the great in it, it comes from the idea that a lot of the trends we've been witnessing in the last 8 months now were all things we were predicting and sort of pulling. Now we're just pulling them forward, and this idea that these transformations were just having to be accelerated, basically. So it's nothing new; it's just happening a lot more quickly. And especially when we were going through the spring with that first wave of COVID and store closures and those sort of things, it was clearly we could see it. I mean, we had graphs left and right reminding us of this acceleration. Things sort of leveled off over the summer, but it'll be curious to see this fall. And Ollie can probably speak to this as they prepare for a second group of lockdowns in the UK starting later this week. How is this acceleration going to maintain itself for another period? And we know it's basically, it's new. There are new standards, new behaviors being created that we probably won't go back to old ways of doing things after which. But it'll be leveling off. We won't be at this pace the whole time.
Lockie, I've had the opportunity and the pleasure to talk with you on the Voice of Retail podcast, and when we last spoke, it was kind of a month or two maybe into the COVID era, and we were talking about the genesis of UNTUCKit was as a digitally native brand that then had gone into stores. In fact, one of your best performing stores was here in Toronto. Give us a sense of how your positioning around the organization has led you to where you are today as the organization, and your thinking and your work. 8 months in, 8 months, 9 months. What's been your experience with the COVID crisis?
We think about the best of times and then the worst of times. It's such an interesting period given the backdrop of what's happening with COVID. But kind of similar to what Carl has stated, COVID has really become a silver lining for those of us in digital transformation on this panel. So I think what we're seeing is we could not have asked for a better business use case for digital transformation. It sort of proved our point. And getting to Carl's point specifically on acceleration, depending on your hot take, mine on COVID is 12 years of e-commerce growth adoption in 12 weeks. I think I've also heard recently that there was 5 years of digital transformation in 3 months in terms of the thinking and the receptivity. And so it's been a really interesting time, exactly as you pointed out, that we started this journey 2.5 years ago. And though we've been running really fast, those companies that started over a decade ago on digital transformation maturity were the ones to benefit. So in some cases, technology was the saving grace. I think back to March and April, once stores closed, I sat on many panels and I have many consulting clients that actually were operating their stores as fulfillment centers. They got special permission from their municipalities to do that. It kept people on the payroll. It was safe. And ultimately, they were able to have buy online, ship from store in effect during COVID, which was a perfect opportunity. Everyone flocked online. We had stock out. So any available inventory in store, if you had the systems, was able to match that demand, which equaled, some people had 80% growth during the COVID period on their e-commerce channels. So we weren't there. Quickly after, we launched buy online, ship from store and curbside pickup, which was all on our roadmap, just unfortunately not before that March 13th date where we made the decisions to close the stores. So it ultimately has been a tremendous success for us rolling that out. But thinking about the future, we could have this again. So investing in these technologies and making sure we aligned our inventory strategies, our website to be front enabled to enable things like curbside pickup and to flip on the dime to contactless pickup required the kind of infrastructure that we ultimately started on that journey as a digitally native brand. And we've seen benefit, but really the ones who excelled during this time started it a while ago. So all proving that you talk to any technology provider, their pipeline of retailers interested in deploying these technologies is pretty full.
Yeah, it's from the school of it's better to have been already doing it, but it's never too late to start, I think, at this point, as long as you can keep your head above water. Ollie, give us a sense of the retail environment in the UK. As Carl said at the beginning, you're about to have a bit of a rough go of it by the looks of the kind of regional lockdowns that have just become national lockdowns, and then dive into us for a bit. I am really intrigued, based on your vast experience in retail transformation. I'm intrigued by the notion generally, and specifically in this conversation, what adaptations and transformations have happened that just are really an adaptation to a white swan unicorn event versus those that you think might be structural changes, like might stick around post-COVID era.
Beginning off with the retail environment, we are just about to go into a second period of national lockdown. And actually, many countries across Europe have already gone there or are just about to go there as well. I think that obviously plays in a huge challenge, particularly at this time of year as we're coming up to peak. And it really plays into the hands of the e-commerce pure plays that have just been sucking up business left, right and centre over the first lockdown and over the past few months as well, as consumer confidence remains highly variable. So there are absolutely some people that are very fearful of the pandemic situation still. And of course, some are much more willing to get out there and re-engage in normal life. And there's lots going on there, which I'm sure we could unpack for a very long time. So does that give a bit of a highlight as to where we are?
Yeah, thanks. That's perfect.
I think then as you look at, I suppose, what's happening with digital technology to the second part of the question, first up, I think it's probably really important when we're thinking about this to keep in mind Amara's law. So this is from Roy Amara, who's a Stanford computer scientist from the 60s, who said, we overestimate the impact of technology in the short term and underestimate the effect in the long term. And I think really what that is pointing down to, even after 60 years later, digital shopping is only just getting started. And I think that's very important to bear in mind. And what we've seen in COVID has absolutely accelerated it. As we've heard, there have been lots of examples of rapid transformation, as Lockie pointed out, around, so many months or so many years of transformation in so many weeks or months. And I think there kind of been, I suppose, three key observations that I've had. Firstly, we've seen some massive consumer shifts in how they're behaving and how they're familiarizing with the likes of e-commerce and with other technologies as well. We've seen the rapid growth of click and collect or curbside and all those sort of propositions as well. So I think that's quite exciting, and they will be probably here to stay, I think. Obviously, probably a bit too early to tell, but we're learning that behavior as consumers. We're learning it. Secondly, I think we've seen a number of retailers deliver new elements to their proposition and really celebrating that they've done digital transformation. But arguably, I think probably they're just coming to the party late. And actually, they should have been delivering some of those elements 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Only yesterday, my wife went to a shop and she ended up picking up a flyer and came home and said, "Hey, Ollie, look, this is a shop. They've just launched their e-commerce website and they're shouting about it." I'm like, wow, well done, guys. And this is a big national brand.
Welcome to 1999.
Yeah, exactly. and then, so I think those that are coming to the party late. But then on the flip side, there is absolutely a wealth of information that has come through over the past few months, loads of different technologies. And it's a very exciting place as we think about, what shopping looks like for the next 10 years, for sure.
Well, it's interesting you bring up that law, because it harkening back to something Carl reminded me of. Scott Galloway was part of Steve, your book launch, and one of the things he says that I've found it's in his philosophy is things are never as bad or as good as they seem, and it reminds me of your subchapter, your theme in the book, where no consumer buys technology, and there's parts of your digitally enabled chapter that is basically saying, be careful about the role digital plays in the overall strategy. Unpack that a little bit for us.
Sure. And I want to tease that at some point in this season, I'm going to reveal my devastatingly accurate Scott Galloway impression. So stay tuned for that. But let's just say the big dog might be in the house at a later date. Well, what I'm trying to get at is this idea that no consumer buys technology, I think, is an important one, because I do think a lot of companies, whether we're Walmart they called themselves a technology company at South by Southwest a couple of years ago. And that to me was just silly. They're not a technology company. Number two, so many of the tech firms that I work with, more startup firms, they lose their way a little bit because they get so caught up or they risk losing their way because they get so caught up in what the technology does as opposed to the customer outcome it delivers. And so technology is obviously hugely important. I spend most of the book talking about the effects of digital disruption and so forth. So I'm not suggesting technology is not important, but we need to keep our eye on the prize, which is what is the solution or outcome or story we're creating on behalf of the customer. And sometimes that absolutely can be mostly or largely about technology. But in other cases, it can be very much a human-centered analog sort of experience, because I'm sure Lockie sees this in her own business at UNTUCKit. A great sales associate can be a big part of driving a great customer outcome, and they may or may not be helped in doing that by technology. But certainly technology is not at the forefront, where in other cases, technology takes front and center. So I think the most important thing is we start with the consumer. We think about the story, problem, solution we're trying to deliver, and then we dissect where technology can make that experience more efficient or more effective.
Lockie, you had, as UNTUCKit and the work you've described to me on the last time we chatted, already well ahead of many brands, but it does leave the question in my mind kind of a two-sided, what's left to do? So I guess the question is, what's next? Are you looking, for example, in the Asian market, there's a big pickup on video, associate to customer via chat and online. I mean, that's not, that we're all on these Zoom calls and all those things. I'm not sure if that's going to pick up exactly the way it does in the China market. But more broadly speaking, what challenges or opportunities are you looking at to grow from here, since you're already so digitally enabled, and how does that fit in the strategy of UNTUCKit?
Sure. Yeah, I definitely wouldn't say we've arrived. There is plenty left to do. But yes, I'm really excited about the fact that because we started so late in really the existence of the brand and looking at digital transformation, we were able to leapfrog and in effect, it really depends. And I find that from my consulting business that depending on the brand, their positioning, certain technologies may make a lot of sense, but at others it doesn't. And so to your specific question, and really building off Steve's point, at the time that we chatted, I was launching Hero, which is conversational commerce. And it does exactly that. We are able to intercept online traffic via our sales associates in store. And the technology in that case is the enabler. The sales associates are absolutely gifted. They can size you up from the door and knowing what your size is. But it took some time for us to really train the fleet of sales associates to know how to interact in an online environment. But once they nailed it, and some got it immediately, and I think the blending of the physical and the digital, I call it phygital. I need a quarter for that word. But the phygital channel,
I think you have to pay us a quarter for that word, actually. That's one of those words.
I actually want to reserve the right to sue you because that's one of my least favorite words, but I'll let it go.
Okay, but you get the point. And I think that's ultimately where we see the blending of what is. So in that instance, who gets credit for that sale, right? It started out online through our beautiful e-commerce website, but then ultimately it was transacted really by that sales associate. And sometimes it turns into a FaceTime where they're walking around the store and showing product. So that's the beauty of it, that we need to stop thinking about channels. I think, Steve, you're absolutely right. And all the principles of your book apply that in this new era, it really is about the customer. And the technology is simply an enabler for that.
Lockie, I interviewed a gentleman named Roger Martin who talks a lot about global strategy. And he said something that was kind of intriguing around consumer habits as decaying assets on the balance sheet of businesses. In other words, his thinking is that a lot of what we do is kind of subconscious, and that the COVID crisis, as much, if not more, than probably the Second World War, has hit this giant circuit breaker on consumer habits. And that could be on the positive side, and we see it, I think, in the data, that consumers are shopping in places they never did before, like they've broken a habit. How do you see, and this is a question I've got for both Carl and Oliver as well, from their perspectives. How do you see customer habits changing now? Now's a bit of a funny time because it's all just, all caught up in a bunch of, a bunch of the heat of the moment kind of things with COVID. But how do you perceive perhaps customer habits changing? What have you observed, and what are the associates telling you? And any insights on that? Any thoughts?
I think it comes down to, and because I have a consulting practice, I'm able to see how this, again, is interpreted across many companies, and whether they're luxury or entry price point. And I think it really is the companies, the brands need to be at the ready for how consumers want to engage with a brand. And we didn't see that bifurcation early on, but
Ka-ching.
Now it's a must. He's getting rich over there. Part of what we see is some customers who were only shopping online are now thinking about, well, I like the ease. I can actually have this product because you offer curbside pickup within the hour or 2 hours. That's amazing. So they're switching behaviors. And as we analyze this, we're seeing cohorts switching, and we didn't see that before. And what is required is for us, to be able to identify that, to switch all of our marketing campaigns and understand now how do we best communicate and personalize, knowing that consumers are leading the way and telling us how they want to engage with our brand. But of course, if we set it up where only those individuals who are shopping in store are able to participate in X, Y, or Z, we now are forced to rethink how we can offer the same value proposition. And as I said, conversational commerce is another way. And we're finding those customers who came in store, built relationships with sales associates, will go online and now are looking for those sales associates because they want that human connection. So just being at the ready to meet the customer wherever they want to engage in this new normal is how we're approaching it.
Carl, you're at the center of this fantastic ecosystem of really innovative technology and operators in the province of Quebec, and plus you've got the academic horsepower of McGill and the School of Retail. What kind of thoughts are coalescing between all those kind of groups that have said, we either have observed or predict the following kind of changes in behavior, and here's how we think we might be able to react to that?
Yeah, and the exposure goes beyond the province. I was actually just before this on with a group in Israel where they were showcasing about 30 technologies as well. And what I find is what's finally coming around, and to Steve's point around the importance that technology serves a purpose, is that in the same sentence now, most of the time, majority of the time, I'm hearing the benefits of the technology along with the business impacts, and usually those business impacts are either measured in a tangible fashion with with financial. So, for instance, one of the technology I was showcasing at this Israeli event was mixed reality, and this company that created a game for Adidas. And right away, they started talking about lift in average sales, conversion, margin. I mean, right away they were correlating the impact that this game, basically a Pokemon, Go type game that was created for Adidas to promote a new shoe, was driving, hard business results. And then the other part being obviously for us, more in the marketing world, the engagement factors, and so their net promoter scores and those sort of things. So that's thankfully. A nice outcome right now where there's no lack of technology and solutions out there, and there's some that are very nascent and probably a little too early to really have those kind of impacts. But the ones that we've been talking about for a while are now being used in this context that really we can measure in tangible ways. Again, the results. The part I'm actually more and more interested in, quite honestly, is not the technology, is the culture. So technology is pretty ubiquitous now, and it's available for. We work a lot with the small businesses here. We're trying to support them more because we see them as sort of left behind in this way. So we know that technologies can reach them now, and they're affordable, and they don't require large IT teams necessarily to implement. Where we get stuck is with the culture and the resistance to change. And I'm basically attributing all quotes now to Steve. So I think Steve said in World War II, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste, and in this case, we're trying to use this as an opportunity to provoke that change. That was you, right, Steve?
I'm pretty sure, yeah.
Yeah, Oliver. It just got me thinking. Picking up on Carl's point about culture, that's got to be a tremendous element of your transformation work. How have you seen both the culture? And is the culture responding to what you're starting to perceive in terms of customer changing behaviors?
Well, I do see culture obviously being a huge part in, continuing to adapt. I think probably in terms of customer behaviors, there's a huge unknown, which we haven't really touched on today. And we'd need to zoom a little bit out of digitally enabled as a topic. And that is what's happening with the whole work from home or remote working piece, which drastically changes consumer behavior. Are people traveling into city centres and town centres and big metropolitan areas, or are they staying more on the outskirts? And that location, of course, has a huge impact on physical retail, but also fulfillment options and delivery options as well. I think what's really important when it comes to culture is that probably the single static thing, or relatively static thing, is that we're continuing to be glued to our phones, our devices. And that is probably the best opportunity for retailers to build community with consumers and drive that sort of culture shift by actually just staying in touch, engaging through those electronic channels.
Yeah, we're going to, last couple of questions for us. Time has just whipped by. It's been fantastic. I'm going to play kind of one of those games where I say a word and you play the association word. So the word I'm going to use, Oliver, I'm going to start with you. Digitally enabled retailer, and you think of who?
I have to say Amazon, to be honest, because it really is embedded into so much of what they do. I mean, they run like clockwork and obviously highly digital in their background.
Okay. Carl, to you?
Apple, I guess. They were using sort of the big obvious ones to get out of the, maybe closely tied with Nike. Maybe doesn't get the digital recognition I think they've doing some really interesting things using their app. But those are sort of my top two.
Lockie, I'm going to give you a gimme on UNTUCKit because we already established they're digitally leading. But any others come to your mind?
Sure. I think what Gap actually is doing and has been doing is terrific in terms of just being savvy about the consumer and trying to stay on point. On top of Lululemon, getting down to that level of in-stock efficiency between buy online, pick up in store, being able to look up products in store, and then, of course, having less than a 2-hour SLA, service level agreement, to have that ready. The amount of technology that goes into that is pretty extensive, and they've nailed it.
And it's interesting, I think their extension of their brand, they did the full purchase of that mirror technology, right? Where you can, they were already a player, but then they pulled the trigger and bought it outright. Steve, what do you think? Anyone's come to mind? You wrote the book on it, so to speak. So what do you think?
Well, I was going to say Nike, and then I was going to say Lululemon.
Go for Sears, Steve. Come on, I know you want to say it.
It's 1985.
Kind of a jump ball between Sears and JCPenney. No, I would go with Starbucks as an example of a company I think that's really dissected the customer journey on a mobile device and the way they show up at different steps of the process, particularly in a world where a lot of their stores are closed. Right now, I think is pretty interesting. But they're, I think, similar to Sephora and some other brands that have done similar things.
Steve, looking around, what do you see or who do you see? It's both more a what that's creating a remarkable customer experience during the COVID era. And that's a question I have for each of the panelists is if something's really caught your attention and saying that's the thesis of your book is you've got to choose remarkable because you've got to stand out. It's not a choice anymore. You must do it. What have you seen that you thought, wow, that's remarkable?
Well, I'll go back to what was said earlier that I think a lot of the companies that are doing really well were those that had embarked on digital transformation earlier. So it's not so much a response to COVID, it's that they're well positioned. So that's Tractor Supply, that's Target. I mean, there are a lot of them I think are doing very, very well because they put the foundation in place and then maybe layered on top some short-term things they needed to do. I think one of the big differentiators now are those companies that are leaning into kind of the human side of all this and showing empathy. So maybe that's keeping people employed or giving wage increases or special bonuses to their associates that have stuck with them or maybe going through financial hardship or emotional hardship or whatever that might be.
That's a bit of a lead into our next episode, by the way, for the listeners. We've got great author Rashad Tabakawala joining us with talking about his book, Bringing Soul Back into Business. Lockie, you mentioned in your conversation around the remarkable work that was going on to connect your associates digitally with customers. Any other examples come to mind for you?
Yes, so I'm a big fan of Best Buy, who recently saved me from a catastrophic event. And the fact that in addition to appointment setting, which you can also do at Apple, but if you don't have an appointment, you are stuck. You have to purchase online. And Best Buy allows for, if you have a last minute emergency, you can also visit with a sales associate. And there were plenty. I had 2 sales associates helping me find replacement products for a webinar that I needed to participate in. So I think, again, thinking about the customer during this COVID period in the work from home, I think Best Buy nailed it.
Oliver, over to you. What do you think? Anything jump out at you?
So I'd like to pull out the example of a UK retailer called Hobbycraft, who have done some really great stuff. They do sort of art supplies and, helping people to get into hobbies, crafting hobbies, as the name suggests. That's obviously been a huge opportunity with helping people with the stress of the pandemic, helping improve people's mental health. They've done some brilliant things on social media. They run this sort of Hobbycraft live videos, live painting, teaching you how to paint an owl or something with oil paints, whatever it is. And that's it's done in a really authentic and human way. It's sort of very natural, and it feels so connecting through the sort of the remote world that we're living in now.
All right, Carl, last word, last examples, over to you.
Yeah, well, listen, I'll try to tie it all together because we've got Tractor Supply and owl painting going on here. So it's
I'd like to paint a hedgehog. I'll pick the hedgehog.
Only
next
you guys
week
can pull this together. But I'll bring it back to Best Buy, but I'll use a separate sort of lens and maybe also tie it into culture, because I got to hear Hubert Joly, and a good Frenchman, a former CEO of Best Buy, now chairman, speak this summer, and he was detailing how they pivoted to click and collect in much of their U.S. locations that were locked down within 3 days. And although they'd had some time leading up to that to run some proof of concepts in the previous years, and they clearly knew how to run their stores as distribution points, they still hadn't really fully embraced curbside pickup, and how they did that basically in 3 days. And his question was, and we also had the Canadian equivalent of this last week. We interviewed the head of e-commerce for Canada, and he was sort of building on that as well, not as quickly, but still 3 days to pivot an organization the size of Best Buy into curbside pickup. Now, the cultural side of that is, again, do you have the people that are ready to take up that challenge? And what are the long-term effects? What are the standards that are created? And he was raising this, as a big question, because we're talking about digitally enabled here. So, okay, we did it. We can do it. We can make those things. How often can we repeat that? Or do we even want to repeat that sort of breakneck speed? Because what are the human impacts along the line of just sort of pushing our people to the limits of change? And it's going to be fascinating. I think, my academic friends are going to have decades worth of opportunities to go through and sift through all these sort of changes and understand the longer term impacts they've had on organizations. But, what is this great acceleration sort of creating in terms of expectations around how quickly we can adapt and change? So Best Buy, kudos in this case to Lockie's example. I think it speaks perfectly of what transformation looks like. I'm just concerned about if we're able to maintain this momentum.
Oh, that's a good point. I'm going to throw in with one. Staples Canada has impressed me. I've been watching them. A whole new team that came in last year. Simon Rodrigue leading their digital, relaunched their site, and then David Boone, their president CEO. They too pivoted to curbside. As they kind of toed and froed between being essential and not essential in different provinces. So they really had to. They'd already done a pretty comprehensive job of BOPUS, but they didn't really have curbside. And then, as a business, they've had to react to both a shockwave and a sledgehammer, right? The shockwave of demand as we all get tired of working on our kitchen table and are looking for office furniture in the home. But then the office side of the business, there's only 10% of the people in the offices these days. So it's been a real whiplash. Whipsaw. Well, listen, this has been a great discussion. Let's leave it there. We could be talking like this for hours about with such expertise on the panel. So I wanted to thank you and throw back to Steve to read us out.
Well, thanks, Michael. And first of all, I'd like to thank Lockie, Carl, and Ollie for joining us on this episode. I really both appreciate their overall big picture insights, but a lot of the very specific case examples that they cited. Anyway, for the rest of the audience, if you liked what you heard, you can subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform. We'd really appreciate that elusive 5-star review, and we'd also appreciate if you would recommend the podcast to your friends and colleagues. I'm Steve Dennis. You can learn more about me on stephenpdennis.com, and be sure and look for me on LinkedIn and Twitter for my latest insights.
I'm Michael LeBlanc, producer and host of the Voice of Retail podcast, and you can learn more about me on www.emileblanc.co. Thanks again to all the panelists. Everyone be safe on this side of the pond, on the other side of the pond, and I look forward to continuing to talk. So thank you, Lockie, Oliver, and Carl.